Hello, class. If you're watching this, then you have reached the point where you are ready to write your introduction, which means that you have finished all of your body paragraphs. You have included research, the paraphrased or quoted directly from the text. You've cited that information properly. You've also written your conclusion, and your conclusion sums everything up and ties everything in a nice little bow. You've probably already written your works cited page as well. So now it is time to start working on your introduction. I know it seems a little strange to write your introduction last. It's the first part of your paper, and probably in the past you've written your introduction first because that's the first thing that comes to the paper. But now that you know what your paper looks like, what your paper accomplishes, now it's much easier to introduce your paper to your readers. So what should your introduction do? Explains to your reader why they are reading this. What is the point of them picking up this piece of paper or reading a document on the computer? Tells them why they should read it. Also tells them some things they should consider when they're starting to read it. Helps them react to the paper. A good way to do this is known as the narrowing down method or the funneling method or the focusing in method. That involves taking a general concept and just like we did with the flashlight, that was a floodlight, we narrowed it down and we got it to something that is much, much more specific. So how we can do this by first getting your reader's attention and then talking about your general area of research, and then identifying a niche in your area, and then finally ending with your thesis statement. Your attention getters can be one of many things. You can start with a compelling story, something that's interesting that has to do with your topic. Maybe a story that happened to you. Maybe a story you've read in a newspaper. Maybe some sort of funny story that you've heard at some point. But a story is sometimes a good way to get your reader's attention and get them interested in what you're going to be reading. You can also include a quote. You can include a quote from somebody that's very important in the field that you're researching. Maybe you're researching a specific person and they have a quote that's very interesting. Maybe someone that's just connected to it. That is another great way to introduce your paper. You could pose a question. Often questions can lead people to become interested in what they're reading. If it is a question that is thought-provoking, that causes people to think, and maybe doesn't have a yes or a no answer, then you might entice them to read your entire paper. You can describe a scenario or a scene or something that's kind of puzzling that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Describe something, let's say that you were talking about a war or something like that, and you could figure out, and you started talking about the puzzling way in which this particular country got into the war. You could cite, if you are talking about some research, you can cite a specific example from the research. That's another way to kind of introduce your paper. But one of the most important things is don't use more than one method. Just use one of these. You can pick one of these 5 and use one of these 5, and those will, either one of those 5 will be a great way to introduce your paper. Next thing you do is you can start talking about the general area of your research. So you're talking about a more broader topic or a broader subject. So if you decide that you were going to talk about Michael Jordan's basketball career, you could start talking about basketball in general, or basketball in the 90s, or the Bulls in the 90s. If you wanted to talk about Taylor Swift and how she changed from country music to pop music, you could talk about the music industry as a whole. You could talk about country music as a whole, or popular music as a whole. If you were talking about your papers about Donald Trump, then you could talk about the current political climate, or you could talk about politics in general. You could talk about celebrities, how celebrities have influenced society. Things like that will kind of help focus in your topic on what you're actually going to write about. Identifying a niche is basically just telling your reader what specifically are you going to talk about. Sometimes your papers can be too general. If you talk about my papers about basketball, that's just too general to talk about. So if you have found something that is interesting to talk about within your topic, then this is an area for you to kind of bring that to your reader's attention. Tell them what makes your paper different, what makes it special, and what is your paper going to do that other papers have neglected to do in the past. Finally, you're going to end with your thesis statement. Now, during on the video that talks about the outline, there is a whole section on turning your research question into a thesis statement. So I highly suggest watching that if you have not watched that yet. But that's pretty much what you need to do for your introduction. Things you should probably avoid doing: don't use Webster's dictionary. Webster's dictionary defines blah blah blah. That has turned into a cliche that has been used over and over and over again, and it becomes very boring. Also, try not to jump right into your research. Lead your reader in a little bit. Don't just jump right into everything. And most importantly, do not bore your reader. Boring your reader by making very boring sentences. The paper is about this. The paper is about that. This is interesting. That is interesting. That is going to bore them to tears, and they're not going to want to read your paper, or they're going to gloss over your paper and not really pay much attention to it. Okay, again, as always, if you have any questions, please ask Ms. Miller or myself, and good luck in your paper.